Hello, everyone. We are moving into our next chapter, which is going to be our endocrine chapter. We will actually spend, obviously, this discussion, a little bit of the next discussion, and then get into the reproductive system to kind of wrap things up for the end of the year. Before we get started in the information for the packet this evening, one of the things that I would like to kind of talk about is the final at the end of the year. And it's going to be over the same information, but it is going to have to look a little bit different. And the reason why is initially we had planned on doing the muscles as our final exam, which is basically going to be you guys labeling the muscles from those sheets that were provided to you. Those sheets are still going to be your resource. We are still going to test over the muscles. The test is going to look a little bit different because if we just do a labeling of the muscles, pretty much all you're doing is looking at your label sheets and then transferring that over. It's not really much of a final exam. So like I said, the information is still going to be over those muscles. I would fully expect that when you take the exam that you would have your books and your notes and your sheets open and available to you. So the questioning is going to be a little bit different. You are not going to need to study them any longer for memorization. And I know some of you guys have already spent some time in doing that because we were anticipating that is what the end of the year would look like, but we are going to have to change that a little bit. But I don't want you to feel like that information is all lost because it will come in handy when we get to that final exam. So in getting ready for that, um, it will be over the muscles. Those label sheets that you have, you will use those. So please make sure that you hang on to those and keep those handy. And then we will just plan on that happening that final week of class. So you guys can, like I said, don't have to worry about memorizing those any longer, but we still will be testing over that information. So with that kind of out of the way, we're going to get into our packet information, which moving into the endocrine glands. The endocrine glands are part of the system, which is essentially the communication system. At the beginning of the year, we talked about the 11 body systems that we have, and we partnered them all up because each one of your systems has a partner system that it works very closely with. And when we look at that, the reproductives, they match up with each other, so that leaves us the remaining 10. And as we've moved through the year, we've pretty much done the partner systems back to back. So we did digestion, and then we turned around and we did the excretory system because those are the two partner systems. This is a little bit different because with the endocrine system, we don't get to do it right with the partner system. The system that works closely with the endocrine system is going to be the nervous system. So your nervous system monitors the body all the time. If conditions are not what they need to be in your body, it's the job of your nervous system to figure out how to make changes in your body to get you back to where you need to be. And the nervous system is going to depend very largely on your endocrine system to help that regulation process take place. So your endocrine system is a series of glands throughout the entire body that are going to release and secrete different products that are going to cause change within your body. And depending on what hormone is released will ultimately determine what change is carried out, but all of it is geared at getting something accomplished in your body. So if you are in a situation where you are scared, hormones are going to be put into your body that are going to increase your breathing rate, elevate your heart rate, increase your blood pressure, dilate your pupils, all of the things that you would need to do to respond to that situation. And once it passes, a different hormone will be secreted that will return you back to your normal conditions. So when we talk about the endocrine system, what we're really dealing with is a series of hormones or chemicals that are released in the body, and they allow different body parts to communicate with each other so that you can get these changes to be carried out within the body. We talked a little bit about hormones and chemicals when we went through our muscle chapter, and that's been a while. That was back in first semester. And when we get into talking about hormones, hormones are going to be chemicals, and you have two different classes. You have what are known as neurotransmitters, and you have hormones. Neurotransmitters are going to be any of those that are released directly from the nervous system. So that's where that neuro prefix comes from, indicating that it is a chemical or a product that comes from part of your nervous system. If we refer to it as a hormone, that is now going to be a chemical that is released from a gland outside of your nervous system. So both of them are talking about chemicals that communicate within your body, but they're where they originate from, that's where we get the two different names. So looking at the first slide that you guys have, it talks about the types of glands. And in the body, we have what are known as endocrine glands and exocrine glands. Now, with an endocrine gland, these are going to be a series of glands that you guys have in the body that are going to release whatever product they create directly into your bloodstream. So they don't need to have any ducts or anything associated with them, because as soon as they secrete their product, it's going to get dumped into a blood vessel. Now it's circulating through your bloodstream, and it will travel through your bloodstream until it finds its target. And once it locates the target, that hormone will be delivered to the target, and whatever change needs to be carried out will then be carried out within that new organ or muscle or wherever the hormone was ultimately delivered. On the other side, when we talk about exocrine glands, exocrine is going to deliver a product, and typically the product that it produces is going to be delivered outside of the body. And so we don't want it circulating through the bloodstream. And in this particular case, you are going to have a duct, which is a tunnel essentially that is going to, like I said, usually lead to the outside of the body so that the product is delivered to the surface. So when we talk about exocrine glands, sweat glands, oil glands, things like that, if you think about that, they are going to have these ducts. They lead to the surface of the skin, and that's ultimately where your sweat is delivered, where your oil is delivered, but we're going to transfer it to the outside. So if you look at the names endocrine and exocrine, endo indicates in, exo indicates out. And so just a little bit of an explanation as to the different types of glands that you have within the body. The second slide looks at secretions, and we do have different types of secretions because when there needs to be communication, that communication is going to need to take place in or happen in different ways. And if you guys think about that, you deliver communication to people in different ways. If you want to say something to just one person, you'll call them on the phone and you have that one-to-one interaction. You guys work in the hospital, and if they need to deliver a lot of information or something big to a lot of people, they get on the PA system, and now they can send that information to a large number of people very quickly. Your body is no different. It has to deliver messages in different ways. Sometimes we want those messages to be very local and very kind of secretive, and in other times we need it to be a mass message and be able to alert a lot of people all at once. So when we look at the different types of secretions, you have a paracrine secretion, and then you also have what is known as an autocrine, and then ultimately we get up to the endocrine. So starting with the autocrine, we see that prefix auto, and that is going to indicate self. So when you have an autocrine secretion, this is going to impact the cell that is secreting the product and only that cell. So this is going to be a very, very localized level of communication and have a very small amount of impact. With a paracrine, paracrine is going to be a little bit bigger. And this is going to impact the cell itself as well as the neighboring cells around it. So this is going to spread out a little bit more, but still it's pretty localized because it's impacting only a small number of cells. In an endocrine secretion, because it is going to be released into the bloodstream, it's traveling all throughout the body, and now it is going to be a much larger scale communication that is happening within the body. So if you need the communication to be very specific, it's going to be autocrine, just that one cell releasing it. Paracrine is going to spread out and be communicated to a group of cells, and endocrine is going to be large scale, going out to glands, organs, and other parts of the body. The next slide that we have is hormones versus transmitters. I kind of jumped the gun a little bit on this one, kind of went through that explanation, but this is information that we had already covered in the years earlier in the year as well. Like I said, when we went into muscles, we had to talk about this because you have the nerve that butts up to the muscle and sends those neurotransmitters over to the muscle so that it knows that it needs to contract. So the next slide talks about the hypothalamus, and the hypothalamus is kind of the reigning gland of the endocrine system. And the reason that I say that is because when you have hormones that are being released in the body, it is a process that has to be very regulated. If you are releasing a hormone into your system and it is going to cause your organs to change how your body is functioning, you need to make sure that the right hormone is being released at the right time and in the right amount. And when the process is done, you need to make sure that that hormone is then turned off. So this is something that has to be very regulated. And a lot of times it's not just the gland that is releasing the hormone, it actually is going to have to get a signal that whatever product it makes needs to be released. And that's what the hypothalamus does. If you guys look in your textbook, it will talk about the different hormones that are released from the hypothalamus. And a lot of times what you will see is it's going to have a name and then it's going to be called the releasing hormone. And the reason for that is the hypothalamus is going to produce a hormone and that's going to be delivered to the ovaries to tell the ovaries they need to start releasing estrogen. Or you would have a hormone that is going to come from the hypothalamus that is going to then be delivered to the pancreas, and it's going to tell the pancreas that it needs to release insulin. So the hypothalamus is really the trigger. It's what puts everything else into motion. And until your endocrine glands get the message from the hypothalamus that they need to start producing their hormones, they're kind of on hold. And that's just a safety measure that your body has in place to make sure that your glands just aren't haphazardly releasing their hormone and their product into your body at any point in time. So it's a checks and balance to make sure that hormones are only released when they're actually needed. Because that job falls to the hypothalamus, like I said, we kind of think of it as the grandfather of the endocrine glands because until it puts things into motion, the other endocrine glands are not going to be able to do anything. The next big gland that we have within the endocrine system is the pituitary gland. Now, the pituitary gland is kind of amazing because it is incredibly small, but it is in charge of a lot of things that happen in the body, a lot of major things that happen in the body. The best visual that I can kind of give you, if you guys have ever seen the uvula in the back of your throat, your pituitary gland is almost the exact same size and shape as that uvula in the back of your throat. Now, we've talked about the pituitary also in earlier conversations when we went through our bone structure. We talked about the sella turcica, and it's that little groove that you have in the skull. And the pituitary gland actually rests in that sella turcica. So it has its own structure within the skull to help protect it just because of how important it actually is. Now, even though it's incredibly small, the pituitary gland is actually divided into two parts. We have the anterior and the posterior pituitary gland, and they give you the proper names that you have there, the adenohypophysis and the neurohypophysis. So those are the proper names. The more common names would be anterior indicating the front side, the posterior indicating the back side. Now, the reason that we have the two divisions to the pituitary gland is because they're actually very different in their structure. The front side of the pituitary gland is going to be a true endocrine gland type structure. And a majority of the hormones that are going to come from the pituitary gland are actually going to come from that front side. So there are 9 total hormones that are associated with the pituitary gland. 7 of them alone are produced in that front half. The posterior pituitary gland is a lot more of a bundle of nerves, and it has much more of a neural structure to it. And so because of that, it doesn't produce as many hormones. And it's also why you see that neurohypophysis term associated with it. It's indicating that it's more a bundle of nerves than anything else. So anterior very true endocrine gland type structure. Posterior pituitary, much more on the nervous side of things. The actual hormones we're going to get into in our next conversation. I just wanted to get the structures introduced this evening. So I know I talked about the 9 overall, 7 from the front, 2 from the back. We will get into those more next conversation. So the thyroid gland is going to be a structure. A lot of people have heard about the thyroid just because metabolism is a big thing right now. Everybody's always talking about if you have a fast metabolism or slow metabolism and how that links to your body shape and things like that. The thyroid, you can see there, is tucked right below the larynx. So you have that cartilage structure of the larynx, and then just below that, on the front side of the trachea, you have that thyroid gland. Now, the thyroid gland, as I said, is going to be responsible for releasing those hormones that are going to regulate the rate at which you metabolize different products within the body. Now, when you metabolize something, what you actually do is you have something stored in the body. It could be fat, it could be sugar, it could be a variety of things. But when you metabolize it, what that's actually saying is that you take it from the form that it's in and you break it down into its most basic components. And so if you have sugar, which is C6H12O6, carbon, hydrogen, and oxygens that are bonded together to make your sugar molecule, you metabolize that. What you're actually doing is you are breaking it apart and you are getting all the carbons by themselves, you are getting all the hydrogens by themselves, and you are separating the oxygens all on their own, so that you can then take those individual elements and relink them and form them into what your body needs. But when we say metabolize, that's actually what is happening. You're taking it from its linked structure and you are breaking it down into its individual components. So the thyroid gland is going to release hormones into the body that are going to help with that process. Again, I'm going to get more into those hormones next week, kind of keeping myself from going off on a tangent there. The next slide that you guys have talks about the parathyroid glands. Now, the parathyroid glands are 4 small structures that are located on the posterior side of the thyroid. So if you are looking at things from the back side, you can see those 4 little nodules. They're attached to the thyroid gland, and the bottom of the slide indicates that it is a posterior view, so that you are looking at it indicates where the esophagus and the trachea would be found. Now, the parathyroid glands are going to work with your blood calcium levels. And so they are responsible for working with the hormones that are going to look at how much calcium you actually have in your blood, and if it's not at the right levels, work to get it to where it's supposed to be. And the interesting thing about the parathyroid glands is when they first found them in people, they were actually mistaken for tumors. And it wasn't uncommon because they were thought to be tumors for them to be removed. And the problem with that is if you remove those glands, you also remove a person's ability to regulate how much calcium is in their blood. And 2 to 3 days after, it was causing these patients to die. And it took a while, kind of trial and error type thing, to figure out that they were not actually tumors, that they were very beneficial and they needed to remain in the body. I'm going to skip over the parathyroid hormones. Like I said, that's more of a conversation for next week. If you guys will drop down to or take a look at your adrenal gland slide. The adrenal glands are going to rest right on top of the kidneys. And the kidneys, if you look at the adrenal gland itself, it's kind of a little hat and just sits right on top of there. Going back to that theme, you guys are going to be saying this for years to come. Nothing in the human body happens by chance. There is a reason for everything. And so if these adrenal glands are placed right on top of the kidneys, there is a very real reason for that. Now, the adrenal glands are going to dump epinephrine or adrenaline into your bloodstream. These are the hormones that are going to give you superhuman strength. And the reason that they are positioned right on top of the kidneys, this kind of goes back to a question we had a couple of weeks ago. 20% of your blood all the time is getting diverted to your kidneys. And so if that much blood volume is going through your kidneys, it's a great place to put an endocrine gland, because that endocrine gland can put its product directly into your bloodstream, very large amount of your blood, and it's now going to get dispersed throughout your body in a matter of seconds. And you guys can probably all think of a time where you've been in a situation where you were very scared and you got into that fight or flight response very, very quickly. And that's because part of what's being dumped into your system is that adrenaline. And for that reason, because those adrenal glands have that access to a very large amount of blood very quickly, you get that dispersed all throughout your body in a very short matter of time. The next one that we have is the pancreas. And the pancreas is a unique gland because it actually functions both as an endo and an exocrine gland. And we don't really see that anywhere else. Most of our glands are very specific. They're either an exo or they're an endo, but pancreas is actually going to have a dual purpose, and it's going to be classified as both. With the pancreas, the location of it is, and you can kind of see the bottom of the stomach there, right at the top, and then it transitions into the start of the small intestine, that duodenum. And the pancreas just kind of sits in that first curl of the small intestine. And it's more to the deep side. I know the picture kind of doesn't do that justice in depicting that, but it is kind of sandwiched back between and your spine and that stomach location. So because of the positioning of the pancreas, if anything goes wrong with it, it's usually very hard to pick up on that because it is kind of tucked more to the backside of the body. And it's just deep location within your central core. Like I said, initially, if something starts to go wrong with the pancreas, it's very hard to kind of pick up on. It will also give referred pain between the shoulder blades. So if something is going wrong with the pancreas, one of the first complaints that people will have is that they have a constant pain, but it actually will present for them usually between the shoulder blades. Now, with the pancreas, one of the biggest things that it is going to release is insulin. And insulin is, again, something that we've kind of talked on. So we're getting to that point in the year where a lot of things that we've talked about previously are starting to come back into the conversation. So insulin is going to help us get glucose from our bloodstream into our cells so that our cells can actually use it. This goes back to our cellular respiration conversation that we had, and how when you put food into your body, especially the sugars, you're going to break that down into glucose, and then that glucose is eventually going to be what your body uses to start cellular respiration, glycolysis, Krebs cycle, electron transport chain, so that you can ultimately build those ATP molecules. Again, we'll talk more about insulin next week. So that takes us to the final slide, which talks about a couple of other endocrine glands. Sorry, I'm just checking on my time. So the last two that we have to talk about are the pineal gland and the thymus gland. Now with the pineal gland, it is an incredibly small gland that you guys have, and the hormone that it is going to produce is called melatonin, and its job is going to be to regulate the circadian rhythms. Now, circadian rhythms is the sleep pattern that you guys have, and at different points in our life, our sleep patterns will change. When you are in high school, sleep patterns can be kind of thrown off, maybe not real regulated. Usually as you get older and you have a regular job, you kind of get into that pattern. You need to be at work at a certain time, you get off work at a certain time, things of that nature. So when you get into a part of your life where you have a kind of pattern that you follow, circadian rhythms are going to regulate themselves. And what I mean by that is your body loves to find a pattern. So when you're getting up at the same time and you're going to bed at the same time, what your body does is it notices that, and it will put a hormone into your body about 30 minutes before you normally would go to bed, which is going to start the process of getting you ready for sleep. It will decrease your blood pressure, it will drop your heart rate, your breathing rate, so that you are in a good place to drift off to sleep when you finally do lay down. On the flip side, when you typically would get up about a half hour before that, different hormones going to come into play, and now it's going to reverse all of that and start getting you ready to wake up. And so because it can find that pattern, it will go ahead and go through that process for you. The problem is, especially when you are a student and you have tests to study for and papers to write and things like that, you might not have a true rhythm that your body can pick up on. And so you, let's say, go to bed at midnight and that's your normal time, but all of a sudden you have a test the next day that you have to study for and you stay up until 3 a.m. to study for the test. The problem with it, people don't understand about how circadian rhythms work, is they think that they can catch up on sleep. So I'm going to stay up really late, I'm going to study for this test, and then I'm going to go and take the test, and I'm going to come home and I'm going to take a big nap. The problem is your circadian rhythm is not expecting you to take a nap in the middle of the day, because that's not normally what you do. And so if you go to sleep when your body is expecting you to be awake, you throw that circadian rhythm off. And so a lot of people will complain that they take a nap and they feel worse afterwards. And it's because you have messed with that circadian rhythm and your body is trying to track and find and get back on your schedule, but you've completely thrown it out of whack because you slept at a time your body was not prepared for you to sleep. If you get off of your circadian rhythm, so if you stay up super late and you're getting ready for that test, if you go to sleep, you normally get up at 6, still get up at 6. Go take the test, and you are much better off going home and taking a 20-minute power nap and making yourself get up after 20 minutes and then going to bed at your normal time. You will get back to feeling normal much faster than if you try to catch up. Can't catch up. The thymus gland that you have, the thymus is located right behind the breastbone. We hit on this a little bit with the lymphatic system as well. This is going to be the one that is going to produce your T cells, train them on how to fight different infections. And once you have them trained, they will stay with you for years and years, so that if you come in contact with that illness or infection again, you have those cells in place. They can immediately attack it before it can ever make you sick again. Now, the thymus is also going to produce what are known as thymosins. Those are the hormones that would come from that thymus gland, and we will talk about those more next week. All right, so that kind of wraps up just introducing the structures of the endocrine system. Next time we're going to split. The hormones really don't take us that long to get through, so we will get through the hormones and a little bit with the reproductive system. If you have any questions about the final exam, I've already had some questions on it. You can email me about that if you would like a little bit more clarification. I will gladly talk with you about that. But just kind of like I said, we will be using those muscle sheets. It's just not going to be a labeling fashion or labeling style test. All right, so that wraps things up for this evening, and I will talk to you next week.